So it's the 21st of November, 2023, Applegate Retreat Center. So this is the end of the second full day of retreat, and traditionally the second day is the hardest. So if anybody who has left, usually, or anybody who's going to leave the retreat will have left by the second day, and then whoever is remaining will probably make it through the whole thing. And so this always happens that even though I know that the second day is going to be the most difficult, and I come to expect it, then it's still the most difficult. So even though I expect it, then still things happen. And even though, and expecting it doesn't make it any less difficult. It's quite interesting. So even for myself, 21 years as a bhikkhu, and today was both external and internal obstacles, and calling the monastery, and there was some unexpected things happening that made me stressed to hear about them. And so I was dealing with that during Ajahn Kurunadamo's morning reflection this morning, and then during one of the first meditations in the morning after that, the morning practice period. And so the mind was temporarily in turmoil, but then it was actually using some of my own methods that I was talking about yesterday, just saying it's okay, not a big deal. The mind is kind of making more of it than it really needs to. And it's actually nothing happening that's that big of a deal. Although it was kind of a first for the monastery, is kind of calling the monastery and finding out that somebody running from the law is in the monastery. So it's like, oh, that's never happened before. Why does it have to happen now? Why today? So it's okay. They've apprehended him, and he's being taken away now. So okay. It's kind of interesting. Because there's nothing really that can be done, but the mind is kind of thinking, well, how can I, there's a problem, it needs to be solved. What can I do? Should I go back to the monastery and kind of deal with it, or stay here? So anytime for myself, I've undertaken either a period of self-retreat or some sort of personal determination, or a group retreat like this, then day 2, or at least in the first few days, there's some sort of upheaval, some sort of difficulty that happens. And so I've come to think of this as entering the mandala, or entering the gate of the retreat. And so when we get through it, and then we're in it, so now we're all in it, and we're inside of the gate now, we're inside of the mandala. And so now the practice is just waiting for us, whatever is going to happen. We're in the building, we're in the gate, and now we can just focus on whatever we're going to focus on during the retreat. And this also happened to me when in 2017 and 2018, did 3 different meditation retreats in Bodh Gaya at the Bodhi tree, and the determination was to do sitting for 10 hours a day under the Bodhi tree, and that was with the monk Ajahn, good Dhamma friend, and we were encouraging each other in the practice. And the second and third trips of those 3 trips were both 6 weeks, so it was 6 weeks of that type of practice each time. And I remember each of those times, that second trip was, I arrived on October 9th, 2017, and the moment I arrived at the guest house in Bodh Gaya, I was getting messages saying Abhayagiri was about to burn down. And so the first few days I was meditating at the Bodhi tree, and my mind was in utter turmoil, thinking there's not going to be a monastery to go back to. And using the Wi-Fi in this guest house to look at these fire maps and how the red on these Cal Fire maps was creeping in around Abhayagiri, and there was just a little circle of not red that was Abhayagiri. And then there was these little tendrils kind of creeping in around the edges. Every hour it was changing, and yet it wasn't going into the monastery. So I thought, well, maybe they didn't update it. Maybe they just don't want us to feel bad. And and so meditating at the Bodhi tree, there's a chant called the Quail's Protection, which is from one of the Jataka tales, one of the past life stories of the Buddha, when the Buddha was reborn as a baby quail, and a huge forest fire was coming into this area, and this little quail, its mother and father flew away, and then the baby quail couldn't fly yet, and it kind of calls out this, what we call an asseveration of truth, that I don't have wings to fly or feet to run, and hereby order this fire to go back. So it's this, we do this particular Paritta chant, this protective chant is supposed to be good against forest fires. So doing rounds of 108 quail's protections at the Bodhi tree to try to ask the Buddha for help to protect Abhayagiri. And it was very hot too. And I had a newly dyed robe with the Gankanoon dye. Like in Thailand, we use this heartwood of the jackfruit tree to dye our robes. And I had this newly dyed robe. And when you meditate at the Bodhi tree, you're outside at this temple. And although you're in the shade for a lot of the day, but if it's hot, sometimes it doesn't really matter. So it was very hot those few days also. And was sweating a lot. So it was maybe 90 degrees for most of the day, and was kind of like sweating and doing these quail protection chants, and then sweating so much that the dye was bleeding out of my robe, and there was this kind of pool of dye around me because I was sweating so much. And it was really uncomfortable. The jackfruit dye it's a kind of a sugar type substance. It's quite sticky when it's wet. And so it was very sticky and kind of just dye bleeding out. And then, of course, after probably about day 4, day 5, we got word that Abhayagiri wasn't going to burn down, and there's this sense of relief. And then the weather cooled down, too, at that time. And then there's this sense, okay, now we're in, and things are okay. And now we can just dive into the practice and do this meditation retreat. And then the next 6-week session, which was several months after that, was going back for, it was actually the final time I was there for that particular period. So this was in February 2018. And went back, okay, back in Bodh Gaya, gonna do another session. Okay, it's wintertime, there's not gonna be any fires. What could happen? So, that session before where the fires came to Abhayagiri, I was living in Thailand and was about to go back to the US, and so I went to Bodh Gaya from Thailand, which is not that big of a time change, but then the final session was directly from Abhayagiri during the winter retreat, went straight back stopped very briefly in Thailand, and then continued on straight to Bodh Gaya, so going straight from the US, which is a 12.5-hour difference. So it's other side of the world, and day turns to night, night turns to day. And was very tired, but then had this determination for a certain number of hours of meditation. So just going back to the Bodhi tree, from the US, going back, same guest house, same sit spot. I met up with Ajahn there again, and thinking, well, the tiredness isn't that big of an obstacle. So yeah, I was nodding for the first few days, but that wasn't that bad. But then it was actually day one. There was a lot of dogs around, and I had this mat, and then I was thinking, okay, what's the day 1, 2, 3 obstacle going to be? And so put this mat out and then do my sitting morning time. They open the doors at 5 a.m. and the doors close at 9 p.m. So you can't really go in before that. So went in just after 5 a.m. and sat for a little over 2 hours. And the sits, your breaks are determined by bathroom breaks. So got up to use the facilities, which is, you have to dedicate about 10 minutes plus to do that. Come back and there's a dog sleeping on my mat. And so I thought, okay, well, I want to keep sitting, but there's this dog on my mat. So I said, shoo, shoo, shoo. And it wouldn't move, and it was just very comfortable there. So I kind of like kicked it, and it kind of yelped, and then it peed on my mat. It got up and peed on my mat. And I thought, so what do I do now? Okay, this is... So I took the mat and I just flipped it over. It was like a waterproof on one side, so I just flipped it over and then sat down for that and had to wash it later, but okay. So yeah, that was an obstacle that arose in those first few days, and then was just really nodding a lot, falling asleep during the meditations, and then after a few days that passed away, that got better, and then I felt like I've through the gate, through the mandala, back into the practice here. I learned a lot from those Bodh Gaya retreats. Then there's the thing that happens when you do a longer retreat. So this is just a 1-week retreat, but still sometimes it happens that you feel exhausted. You feel like, okay, I've been meditating a lot each day and feel exhausted. So for both myself and Ajahn, this happened at week 5 of that final session. And for myself, I had this thought. I remember meditating, it was like hour 9, and I thought, I've meditated enough now. And it's going well, and enough. I'm not going to meditate. I don't need to meditate anymore. Don't want to meditate anymore. And so it was, week 5 of 6. And so there's this, because it's each day, and it's Bodh Gaya, there's noise, there's sickness, there's dogs, there's just everything. And so thinking, I just want to stay in the guest house, just want to rest. But there's this determination for a certain number of hours, and we usually don't recommend to meditate a certain number of hours. It's not always the best thing to do, but in this particular instance, it was very helpful. And so I was kind of thinking, waking up in the morning thinking, I'm totally exhausted. And normally we would go at 5 a.m., get into the complex about 5:15. Just thinking, today I don't want to go. Don't want to go meditate today. And there's this feeling of just walking through quicksand, just walking towards the complex and just walking through quicksand, and just physically and mentally tired, exhausted, feeling like there's no more gas in the system. But then we were encouraging each other and just, okay, let's just do this. Let's just go. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the meditation's good or bad. We just do it. That's all that matters. And so going and getting in and thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to sit down, and I'm not even going to Like my mind wasn't in a state where it wanted to look at a meditation object at all. And so get in, and okay, I don't care if I fall asleep, don't care what comes up, all I'm doing is getting the hours right now. And just sitting here. And so I plopped down, and then something happened, and it became really good. It was a really good day. And I wondered at it afterwards. I wondered why that was, and wondered at it, and I thought, okay, this is interesting, because when there's a strong determination to practice and to push through obstacles like that, that puts us in uncharted territory. So usually when we're left to our own devices, or we're just doing a retreat by ourselves, and we don't really have any kalyanamitas, any Dhamma friends pushing us to practice harder than we normally would, then we're just going to stay within our comfort zone. It's just only natural. And we're not going to really, if we feel exhausted, the obvious thing to do is rest. Mentally exhausted, the obvious thing to do is just give it a break for a while. But then pushing through that just because of this determination that we had, and then it was really good. And it was moving into uncharted territory. And just energy came up, and the mind was fairly bright, fairly still, and a lot of inspiration came up, and a feeling of, a sense of wonder, kind of that's how the practice works. We really do have to push ourselves. We really do have to push the envelope a little bit more than we would think in order to truly get the benefits from the practice. Those benefits that are available, we just have to reach out and get them. So that's what's possible. And just thinking, then from then on, it was good. It's almost like there was another gate to go through at that point. So when we're tired, when we're fed up, when there seems to be a lot of hindrances, then not to lose heart, but to really be able to sit with that and put space around it, and to be able to be with it. And that's the Kanti Barami, that's the development of patient endurance. And then we don't know what's going to happen. We might have a preconceived idea that, if I sit with this hindrance, or if I'm with this particular mental state, then I don't want to be with that. That's very unpleasant. But then when we actually do it, it can be unexpected what actually happens. It's actually, things can open up in a way we didn't expect. And that's one of the wonderful and marvelous things about the practice too, and the Dhamma, is that we don't really know what we're aiming for because we haven't experienced it before. So, even things like samadhi, or we talk a lot about the jhanas and use these vocabulary words, and we don't really know yet. We don't really know yet what these things are. We just have an idea. We see these descriptions. We hear teachers talk about them. And yet we aren't yet at that ehipassiko. The Buddha says, come and see for yourself. So no matter how many descriptions we hear, no matter how much we study, then if we don't really reach out and get it, reach out and take it for ourselves, then we're not really going to know. It's like eating apples. So it's like eating apples. We might study apples for our whole life, and we might write doctoral theses about apples, and we might know everything about the biological makeup of an apple, its anatomical, its the molecules, the types of molecules that make up an apple, how it grows, how it dies, its lifespan. We might know absolutely everything about an apple, and yet we don't really know an apple until we just reach out and we just take an apple and eat it. So we can eat an apple and we can actually know it firsthand, know what it's like, know the taste of it without doing any study about it. But we just have to actually engage with it. So the practice is the same. Engaging with it is better than studying about it. We might need to study about it just to convince ourselves to engage with it. We might need to study about it just to develop enough trust, faith, and confidence in it in order to reach out and take it and to fully go headfirst into it. So study can have that type of benefit. But for a period of retreat, especially a monastic retreat, where some of you here, it might be fairly new to the precepts. Some might be old hands in the practice. So there's a wide range here. Some people here might feel like, oh, a 1-week retreat, and this is a super easy schedule. This is really, really basic and maybe too easy. And some of you might feel like, wow, this is really extreme. This is really difficult. So wherever we're at, we can still just really look at those mental states and really be able to sit with them. And Ajahn Chah would talk about the practice being difficult. He would talk about the inevitable difficulties as we learn, as we train on this path, as we study the Dhamma, study and practice, and learn how to be adaptable, learn how to train the habits of mind to be more wholesome, less unwholesome. And talking about his own practice, Ajahn Chah, Longpo Chah, was known to say, oh, I tried everything in the practice, and it was so difficult, and I trained so hard just to be able to have a sense of well-being, just to be at ease. Trained so hard for so many years just to be able to be sabai, just to be able to be at ease. And he said the practice was so difficult. It was like eating these Thai spicy leaves and peppers that are allowable in the afternoon. He's like, it's like eating these spicy leaves, and they're so spicy, and you're eating them, and you're crying, and your nose is running, but they taste so good you just can't stop. And he's like, that's what the practice is like. He's like, it was so painful, but I loved it. Couldn't stop because I saw the benefits of it. So it's like we're intentionally engaging with something difficult, but part of us also sees that there's great benefit in it, and so we keep engaging in it, we keep going. Or it might just be as subtle as following a scent of virtue. I think, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? Why am I enduring all of these privations for the sake of the practice? Why would anybody take on the 8 precepts? Why would anybody ordain and become a monastic? Why would anybody do that? So it's really because we see there is a benefit to it, and the benefits are great. If we do it, if we practice, if we train according to the Noble Eightfold Path, and we really develop it, the benefits are great. So it's very helpful to have these examples of teachers. And teachers, I've been a bhikkhu long enough now to have met great teachers of many different traditions. I've met many great Thai forest ajahns, of course, which I hold up in the highest for myself, but also met Tibetan Rinpoches and met great monks in the Chan tradition also. Got to personally meet Goenka and his wife when I was in Anagarika, when he came to Fort Bragg to open a center there. And were you there for that? When we met Goenka? Backstage with Goenka? Yeah. I've never done a Goenka retreat, but I met Goenka in person and his wife. They were very nice. They offered robes to the Sangha. Oh, that was so difficult when I was in Anagarika. And years later, somebody had snapped a photo of that meeting of us backstage with Goenka and showed it to me. Is this you? I said, yeah, wow. I didn't know somebody took a photo of that. Wow. And I did not look happy in that photo. Thought, wow, I was really going through it. Yeah, I could. Wow, I'm glad I didn't leave at that time. Yeah, it was this Ajahn Amaro. I think Ajahn Amaro was with us that day. Apparently that center didn't work out. It closed not too long after it opened in Fort Bragg. But now there's a different Dhamma center in Fort Bragg, Three Jewels Branch Monastery of Abhayagiri, that's open now. So that looks like it's doing well so far. Ajahn Kasapo and Ajahn Titapanyo, first Vasa, very successful. So it's a very wonderful little branch monastery. But anyway, yeah, not to be shying away or have trepidation about these inevitable difficulties that will arise. So having completed 2 days, we can, I find myself doing this every retreat, we can give ourselves a pat on the back, and we've made it through the second day. And looking forward to the rest of it. We can get a good rest, do the morning meditation, listen to more reflections, contemplate, and not to lose heart when we're meditating and the mind is just, there's a storm in the mind, that can happen. We're trying to focus on the breath, or we're trying to focus on some sort of meditation object, and the mind is just rebelling and not able to focus so well, and that's okay. When we do that sit, when we put in that time, at the end of the day, chances are we're going to feel quite good about it, that we did that. And it's really the process of purification of the mind, that purifying process. It's kind of like taking the heart and immersing it in a stringent, strong medicine. It stings, but then there's these accretions on the heart. We can imagine that there's like a crust on the heart, and it's being dissolved by this strong Dhamma medicine, but we have to immerse the heart into it. And it's a very strong, astringent medicine, and it stings. It's like putting medicine in an open wound. It stings, but it's killing the infection, and it's purifying. It's purifying that open wound, making it so it doesn't get more infected, and helping it to heal. So we can imagine that that's what it's like when there's a storm in the mind. That really is like a purifying process. And then when we meditate again, it's not going to be the same. It's going to keep changing. And nobody's going to have it good all the time. There's always going to be these inevitable difficulties that we go through in the purifying process. Think of it as purifying the knowing. So the knowing is, the attention is jumping around all over the place. And when things are empty, when there's a lack of distractions in the space of a retreat, it's just the nature of the mind to try to grab out to anything, to try to grab onto anything. So it's going to move around quite a bit, at least at first, until it gets a bit tired and it's just going to start to settle. Or we could think of it as it's like a muddy water, and it just needs to sit still, and it just takes time to settle. And there's not really a process to just shock our mind into settling. It just takes that time so the muddy water settles. If we were to shake it up again, we have to settle it all over again. But as long as we allow it to settle, so it's really about just allowing the mind to settle. So we allow that jar of muddy water. And first, if for anybody who's ever done adobe construction, you do a sediment test on the material you're going to be using first. So you take the earth, the dirt and earth that you're going to be using. So you want to use the earth from just whatever area you're building in. You're making adobe bricks, and you do a settlement test to make sure it has the right percentages of sand, finer sand, dirt, and clay. And so you shake it up, and then the coarse sediment settles to the bottom first. And you let that sit longer, and then the medium grains will settle on top of that into another layer. And then if you were to shake it up again, you really have to start the process over. But if you keep letting it settle, then it might even take days for those very finest grains to settle down, but then you're going to have a nice layer of the finest grains right on top there. And that only can happen when you let the jar of water sit still. If you pick it up, you move it, you just have to let it settle again. But as long as you don't pick it up and move it, then every single layer can settle and you're going to have clear water on the top. So the mind is very much the same. How we have to practice, just a lot of it is just allowing it the space to settle. It's not necessarily the case that we do the perfect technique or even get the perfect technique just right. There are certain techniques which might be right for different individuals, but in general, whatever technique we're using, it's also just allowing the mind that space to settle, that patience to settle. If we think, oh, well, it's been days in this one technique, my mind isn't settled yet, this one technique isn't working, I'm going to change to another one. That's like taking that jar and just shaking it up again. We just have to start over. So just to put in a plug for sticking with whatever technique we're using and just give it some time and allow the mind to just naturally settle. That's probably enough food for thought this evening, and I'll leave it there.